and welcome to the latest episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Andy Williams.
Welcome along. I'm Jo Redfern. Emily, who have we got today?
Yeah, I'm Emily Horgan, and I'm very excited to be here with Paul Schleicher, who was involved in the production of Bad Dinosaurs, which is an animated series that hit Netflix earlier this year and got me super excited because the series popped in the Netflix Global Top 10 for 5 weeks in a row, which is quite an achievement for any kids series. You know, it's definitely up there in terms of records that have been broken and records that have been set in terms of kids series hitting that metric. And in addition to that, when we're looking at the 6-month Netflix engagement reports, there's some really good stories for Bad Dinosaurs too. So, Paul, I'm really excited to have you here to talk to us about the show.
Well, thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say, and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, just to kind of set us up a little bit about Bad Dinosaurs, your involvement with it, you know, the general premise of the show.
Where did the idea come from?
Sure, yeah. Well, Bad Dinosaurs started off as a series of YouTube shorts, 2 of them to begin with. And it started its journey about 10 years ago. There was a British animator creator called Joel Veitch who had a label called Rather Good. And with a few of his longtime collaborators, writer Dave Shute and animator Alex Mallinson, they created this silly slapstick a short film called Dinosaurs, Terrible Lizards. And the idea was that the word dinosaur means terrible lizard. And the idea being that what if these dinosaurs weren't terrible as in like rawr, but terrible as in just crap at being dinosaurs. And so they designed all these really lovely characters and took the things that we associated with different types of dinosaurs and really exaggerated them. And they animated a few minutes long, some animation tests, and then an initial pilot, and put it out on YouTube. And it was really popular. You know, it because the dinosaurs weren't speaking, it traveled around the world really well. It was really popular in South America and India, and ultimately they came to us after trying to get it away for a few years and being a little bit unsuccessful. They had it set up as maybe a YouTube series that was going to get financed. And then when the legislation came in around kids content and advertising on YouTube, that got orphaned again. And we came to it probably about 4 or 5 years after it had first been created. And it came to us because Joel and my business partner, Dan, had met at a short film festival in Sao Paulo. And both of them had been sponsored by the British Council to go with their own short films, and were presenting them at this film festival. They met and they liked one another. And then a number of years later, when Dan and I were looking around trying to think of projects and people that we could collaborate with to try and develop and make some stuff, we reached out to Joel, and he came in and shared what they had been doing. And we just thought it was so funny. And the character designs were really great. We love the tone of humor. And we thought this would be really fun to work on. And so what we did was we helped package up the show, worked a little bit on the sort of pitch materials. And I had known somebody who had just joined Netflix, and they used to work at an animation studio, which is what my background is in. And they had just joined as adult commissioner, and we went to them and said, hey, we've got this show we'd like to pitch. And they put us in touch with the kids and family team. And we sent them across our pitch, and they emailed back and said they liked it. And, you know, it was sort of a one and done. They wanted to make it, or they're going to development at least. And so we are paying for that good fortune now, but we had really good fortune the first show that we took out to market, in that we took it over to Netflix. They liked it, and they offered to take it into development.
That's awesome. I feel like we might be on a theme, you guys, of lizards that take decades to development, following the conversation with Steve Smith at Beacus last week. But the YouTube side of it is super interesting because that's not something I was necessarily aware of. So the shorts existed on a YouTube channel before the development had started.
Yeah, the YouTube channel was rather good. It was rather good. Was a sort of
that's the brand name, as opposed to your personal assessment of it.
It was both a brand name and an absolute label of quality. Joel was a indie creator, and he was making lots of anarchic early flash animation videos, a bit of live action, a bit of stop frame, and these were kind of early internet, really shareable things, and he became quite popular in that sort of indie animation scene. And this was one of the more popular things that kind of broke out, and I think it was obviously squarely at kids. A lot of his other stuff was for adults, teenagers, and whatnot. And this was really made with the idea of, hey, we could make a show off the back of this. And so while it was on the label rather good, I don't think it's like you would think of a multi-channel network nowadays where there was a real purpose in driving large audience and cross-populating audiences. These were individual things that were going out into the world and then had to get popular on their own right. But, dinosaurs, we often talk about them being a bit of their own IP in a sense, because they're kind of very recognizable. They're really popular with kids. And if you put something out that says dinosaurs in the title, kids will click on it and they like it. And then if it's good, they'll stick around and watch it. And so Terrible Lizards didn't have dinosaurs in the title, but it still traveled wide and over the years. I think when we came to it, it had about 40 million views on YouTube. And because we had those metrics of like what countries it was popular in and stuff, we could take that over to Netflix and say, hey, this is some of the comments that we got. And while we didn't have a massively established IP, we were able to show its popularity, show that people were connecting with it, they liked it, they were resharing it, and it was sustaining its popularity over time on YouTube.
And that's really interesting because of the legacy of that IP. Did you stick quite closely to the look of those original YouTube shorts in terms of the character design and all of that style?
Yes and no. So Alex, who designed the initial characters, has this amazing design sensibility where you could see in the designs of the characters that you would get these quite clear geometric shapes with details added onto them, and that design principle stayed all the way through. And some of the characters that were in the initial series, those characters kind of remained in the final series, but those animations were done over a decade ago, and they were done with one person. And so it's obviously we were up-resing it, we went through a redesign phase, but I think that core design principle being so strong, we were able to stick with it and carry it through and up-res the fidelity and expand those designs onto loads of other characters. So the characters in Bad Dinosaurs are much more premium and really well designed, and both our character designers and also the animation studio, Abel and Baker, did an amazing job of delivering really high quality animation. But throughout those original designs and those original ideas that went into the early designs stayed as the sort of foundation for the animation.
And were there any specific influences that shaped not the look or the aesthetic, but the comedy approach?
Yeah, I think that initially there was this idea of kind of doing a mockumentary, doing an Attenborough-style documentary. We'd have this narrator who was just in awe of these majestic creatures, even though they were all acting like fools and doing stupid things. And so that created a lot of the comedy is like how ridiculous these things are, but how in love with everything the sort of narrator was. And so it had this documentary or mockumentary sort of angle to it in the initial shorts. And through development, we were thinking a lot about whether we keep in the narrator who was kind of setting up our stories. Would we need it? And as we developed more sophisticated storytelling, obviously we had lots of time to be able to develop the characters. We realized that a narrator would be more of a crutch, and kind of in the development process, we dropped that and just allowed the characters to kind of tell their own stories on the outright. And being nonverbal, obviously we're a bit concerned about, would the storytelling be strong enough? Would it be good enough? And it's a credit to the writing team and also the storyboard team and the director and everybody to try and ensure that the storytelling was really compelling and the characters were well rounded, and and Netflix were super supportive in that development process to get there.
That's so interesting, because the other thing that I'm seeing from Netflix data as well, that looking at those 6 monthly engagement reports, is that these languages comedies are kind of a really core part of the offering on there. You've got things like Booba, you've got things like Grizzy and the Lemmings that are kind of pulling in engagement, kind of month on month. Things like Shaun the Sheep. On the preschool side, you have Mighty Little Bean, which is kind of like the start of that. So that decision to keep the narrator out of it kind of feels in line with what the trends are saying.
Well, there's a long history of silent comedic animated storytelling, from sort of early Chuck Jones and Tex Avery cartoons. And when we were in development, we looked back at those a lot and thought, well, if they could work back then, we can make them work now. And and audiences, I think they just really love funny storytelling. And when you take away the sound, you're reliant on physicality to do great humor. And I mean, even in live action, sort of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin or whatever, there is a fantastic tradition of silent comedy. And I don't think it necessarily means that your characters are any less sort of multidimensional. And that's really what we found. And I don't know that we would have put our mortgages on it in the first instance that was going to be true, but fortunately we had enough time and the budget enough to really kind of develop and spend a long time in the writer's room, and had enough time with the storyboard artist to ensure that the episodes and the performances were really crafted well to work, and then obviously the animation team at Abel and Baker to be able to deliver on the 3D animation side to make sure the characters performed well, they had distinctive personalities, and all that intention carried through into the animation.
Yeah, but that's the other thing too, as to why the original shorts were so successful, because they were dialogue free, posted on YouTube, global platform. They have that travelability as a single asset to kind of compile all those views and have that, just show that like that mass connection, or and like, I'm not saying like connecting with Bad Dinosaurs, it's not it's not necessarily the biggest hero's journey, but it's just funny, and that's strong, and that is something that that languages, dialogue free comedies that have been around, like a staple of program schedules for years. There's lots of other strategic upsides to them as well.
Yeah, I think one of the other challenges with that is we really wanted to have a series structure that had a beginning and an ending that carried across all 24 episodes. So within each episode, there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a sort of a specific character whose point of view it is, or whose sort of story it is. Usually one of the core family of T-Rexes, a mother and 3 chicks, and so each episode kind of had who was the lead person in that episode, and where are we going to start, where are we going to end, and it feels satisfying at the end. But then I think that we worked really hard to ensure that it's not just a single closed off episode, but the 3 episodes that stitch together in a block all kind of feel like they move a wider arc of this family's journey, from losing their home in the beginning to traversing the Mesozoic to finding a new one, and the other characters they interact with, and kind of becoming more of a fully functioning family and able to exist in a wider set of community of dinosaurs in the end. And so, that was an additional layer of challenge to try and make sure the episodes worked at all those different levels. And I think they do. We're really proud of how that sort of comes together, and you can watch it all the way through as quite a sweeping character journey for the characters, and in spite of the fact that they're not able to tell you what's going on or communicate with one another sort of verbally, we're still able to get that across, which is great.
And I'd imagine that what was the duration of the shorts on YouTube?
Oh, I can't remember. A couple of minutes. I mean, they were certainly shorter than the sort of 7-minute episodes, and so one of them was kind of a collection of vignettes, as it were. Another one was, and then once we started getting involved as well, they made a couple of minute long short films and stuff. So sort of 2 to 5 minutes.
And so was that? I'd imagine that the challenge was finding a way to still have a non-verbal show, but have a kind of a much bigger canvas in terms of duration. Was
Yeah.
that a challenge, or was that something that kind of you found easier to adjust to than you thought?
Well, I think because we weren't really involved in the initial sort of short films, and those were very much based on a single setup and a single gag and a little bit more of that. That was probably a little bit more fit for purpose. And I think quite early on, we had a bit of a swing. Are these 5-minute episodes? Are they 11-minute episodes? Are they? And we landed on 7s, and that was in conversation with Netflix, and always felt just about right. 7-minute storytelling, again, in those sort of silent comedic storytelling, is a long history tradition of that. And it gives you enough to kind of really get into getting a couple of misdirections and fails and character trying to achieve their objective, and it's quite satisfying by the end of it. So I think that that pretty early on felt like it was a good duration.
And when you're trying to tell a story without language, and you've mentioned about structuring and formatting each episode, but what other things in the absence of language do you have to dial up because you haven't got the signposting?
Well, it's it's tricky to think of specific examples, but when we've been thinking about other shows and could this be a nonverbal, could this does it need to be a dialogue show, it's really interesting how much stuff you actually have to create. Very sequential storytelling. Nothing can really happen off screen. You can't really say, and we did this. So you create stories that are kind of following our characters through a bit of a journey. And with this show as a bit of an odyssey, that kind of helped because they're constantly sort of moving in a direction or something very clear is happening. And you don't have language, but you did have quite expressive performances. And I guess that's the other thing that we debated quite a lot, was how anthropomorphic can we make these characters? Can they really, how can they sound and make sounds that are similar to words? How, and because they're quite animalistic and prehistoric, we tried to keep them as natural as possible, while still being able to make extreme kind of shapes and a little bit of squash and stretch and all that sort of stuff. So I think the physical comedy, physical interactions, but everything kind of has to play out on screen because you can't really get much context outside of that. There's probably a few examples of where we did do that, but at least that's what I think is a rule of thumb.
Mm.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, so there's it's obviously there was a lot of over and back and like discussions around the various things in production. And like it's resulted in a really funny show. I know like my 5-year-old boy was thoroughly entertained by it. So that's really great. And then what the performance that then came through Netflix, obviously we saw the show was featured in the top 10 for 5 weeks in a row. I mean, did that come completely out of the blue for you guys? Were you working in the background furiously on marketing campaigns?
Yeah, we did work with the Netflix marketing team to try and help build assets. I think it's a real challenge. We all know, when we've heard this a lot, that discoverability is a big challenge on streaming platforms. And so was the case when we were talking with Netflix. They were very clear that the biggest motivator for audiences is really great artwork on screen, in the thumbnails, in the carousels, or whatever. And to their credit, the marketing team at Netflix, using the assets that we provided them, created a real great suite of assets. I always thought they popped on screen and stuff. And so we were super proud of all that stuff and happy with it. I think that we did a little bit of work on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So they launched trailers and they put some episodes out there. But I think the truth is we scooped up the audience that was there on Netflix. I don't think this isn't a big toy brand. It's not something that already exists in the wider awareness of parents. We had to convince kids to click on it when they're going through it, or parents to click on it and say, there's a new dinosaur show. My kids like dinosaurs, whatever. And let them have it. And so, yeah, we were absolutely over the moon when we sort of popped up into that. I mean, we landed at #1 on the kids platform, and kind of we're on the kids sort of page on Netflix, and we're kind of rooted there, which we're really pleased about. But getting into the top 10 with Three Body Problem and Ripley and Baby Reindeer and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we were a bit below them, but we're, it was good company. And so we're quite pleased to find ourselves there.
Yeah, and I think you make the comparison well of, like, not being an established toy brand and having that kind of machine behind you, because, Hot Wheels Let's Race launched around a similar time.
Yeah.
And you guys, like, okay, Hot Wheels Let's Race came in higher, but Bad Dinosaurs is really up there, right? Like, it's really giving it a run for its money in terms of the amount of engagement that we saw for it. So, I mean, as that kind of perfect counterpoint, where, like, Hot Wheels being such an established, well-known heritage brand that everybody knows, versus Bad Dinosaur, and obviously then maybe the machine at Mattel that would have been helping that, and even if it's marketing dollars on their side and muscle, corporate muscle in terms of making sure Netflix are doing everything they possibly can, and yet Bad Dinosaurs popped. So it's really such an achievement.
Yeah, we're really proud, and I think I'm not so. I really don't know what kind of effort went into promoting Hot Wheels outside of the sort of Netflix ecosystem, but we certainly saw that show come out before ours did, and we were tracking their numbers alongside our numbers, and we were really pleased with how well we performed. And you're right, that show sort of got a few more views than ours did, but ours, from a standing start, coming out, having no sort of recognizability, being able to come and grab an audience like that, I think we were really pleased with how well it performed.
And did you? Sorry, I'm just interested in whether you had any feedback from that audience that had discovered it originally on YouTube, because that's, we speak a lot about how difficult it is for new IP to pop, but those that have proven themselves elsewhere, even on YouTube, and in the grand scheme of things, are not all. You're not in books. You're not from a literary estate or comics or elsewhere. But did you get any feedback from those original fans as to how it had evolved when it hit Netflix?
So I would say there was a little bit from fans of Rather Good, because they were kind of fans of Joel and the work that him and his guys were doing. We changed the name of the show. So there wasn't it was originally called Dinosaurs, Terrible Lizards, and it was called Bad Dinosaurs. So there wasn't a one-to-one connection. And also the Dinosaurs, Terrible Lizards, it was 10 years ago. And so a lot of the, there wasn't really a fervent fan base necessarily for that show, who were buying merchandise or doing things. I think you could, obviously it's a different sort of thing if we're looking at some YouTube first, building a franchise, building an audience, and trying to grow that into content on lots of different platforms as a direction of travel for new projects. But that was more of a sort of classic, we're some animators, we're some creatives, we're going to make a thing, we're going to put it out on the internet, and hopefully then it'll get popular and we'll go and try and sell it somewhere. So there isn't that sort of strategic growth plan that is leveraging one to support the other. It was really like a proof of concept that then you could take to the commissioners, which I think would still work today, depending on what you're trying to do. And when we're looking at original concepts, it's like, okay, how can we put this out and grow an audience? Could we do a podcast around it? Could we do a comic book around it? Could we do something that we can take in and say, look, we've made this thing and it's really entertaining and people like it. We could make it into this thing now. That's great. Versus we're going to build a franchise, and part of that franchise at the right moment will become a streaming or a television show.
I think that's super interesting, though, because that's like, I think that the potency of being able to start small with something that's much less of a risk, like a podcast, for example, is something that's kind of a little bit untapped in kids media at the moment. And I think, when people are saying, commissioners are saying, I want established IP, I want proven IP, I would say, like, established and proven are two different things. Established is Coco Melon. It's made. You can't, it's made. It's got an audience. You can't really you incur risk if you change it majorly. Proven, there's a lot more nuance in proven, and if it can be proven on a small, really manageable scale, then you don't have the same risk of changing it to fit the broadcaster a little bit more, changing it to the platform a little bit more.
And animation is so slow and quite expensive, or labor intensive at least, that it means it's very difficult to make a thing. And so looking at audio or looking at sort of print or even a web comic or something like that. I think we're sort of exploring all those things. I mean, it's difficult for a business because, as a company, these things take a long time to incubate and sort of get out into the world. And, it's much easier if someone comes along and says, hey, let's develop this show, and then if we can develop it and we like it, we'll go and make it. But I don't think really that's happening that much right now. And so we're very actively thinking about how can we make stuff and get it out into the world that we can go and show to somebody and say, see, look, this is a great idea.
Yeah. And one of that came up in the podcast that we had about anime and manga, and in the way that webcomics and manga end up being like pilots for the anime or for the animation. And it feels like that is kind of a sensible development and IP creation route, really, rather than the expense potentially of kind of doing the animation. I had a question on Netflix when you were talking about the kind of the data and the feedback from fans on the YouTube shorts. It made me wonder what kind of feedback or actionable insights you get when you have a show that's on Netflix, in terms of that you can then feed into season 2 or kind of building new episodes. Are you able to kind of talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, there was a couple of points during the development and during production where we were able to sort of get some feedback. So we worked really closely with our production exec, Will, on developing the show. And I think he really helped us to understand how to make the show be as successful on the platform as it could be, just in terms of when, from little things like timings of when you need to sort of get into the sort of guts of an episode, to how you might want to not create cliffhangers but pull the audience through from one episode to the next, and how to structure it so it felt that it worked well in these 3 episode stitches, and also around tone. We really worked closely with him on our tent poles for the show, which were sort of funny, heartfelt, and surprising. And whenever we came around to looking at episodes, okay, does this feel that whatever idea we've got is chiming with those sorts of ideas? And the other thing we did about 2/3 of the way through production was we worked with Kids Know Best to do a project of audience research. And so they took some animatics, they took some animation tests, they took one sort of half completed episode, I think, and they went and interviewed a bunch of kids, showed it to them, showed them designs. And so a couple of things came out of that. One was the audience skewed a bit younger than we had thought. We were developing it for a slightly older audience, sort of, 6, 7, 8.
My little son's 5, he's loving it.
and the real sweet spot was 4 to 6, and some of that's the bright colors, some of that's the non-dialogue. And the other thing that was really great was the research sort of showed that it was really popular between boys and girls. But one of the things that I thought was an absolute joy that came out of that research, that I wasn't expecting or didn't anticipate, was that because there's no names, we had names for all the characters, and those names kind of had genders associated with them. But because it was no dialogue and the kids weren't given any names, they were able to sort of imprint their own genders and their own sort of family dynamics and family structures on all of the characters. So our Janet, who is the mum, became the dad, or the brothers and sisters would flop around this way and that way to mimic whatever family that they had. And so that was a real joy to think that, kids can kind of imprint their own world onto this show a little bit.
That's really lovely, actually. And one of the advantages of having something that is non-dialogue or languageless, isn't it? It almost breaks down a barrier to allow the audience to then map on, their own particular names or family structure. Whether it's a bunch of female siblings or a mix, or it's your brothers. I think that's really sweet.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was great, and and then when we completed the series and we put it out, obviously we get a lot of feedback on online. There was we certainly weren't an education centered show. We were very much fun and jokes and comedy and characters, and we worked really hard on the relationships and all that. but we weren't really focused on anything that was particularly educational or overtly educational, at least. It was entertainment first, and so I think we had some funny jokes. We had lots of fart jokes, lots of sort of physical comedy, and lots of sort of people getting squished by other people's butts and stuff. And so it was definitely comedy first, and some people loved it and some people less so. And so, we'd get a few comments about, oh my gosh, look at all these sort of dino butts squishing one another. And so.
Well, you can have languageless, but you can't have fartless, where kids' comedies.
Yeah, I'm just doing this now because I remember texting on our group about Bad Dinosaurs, and Redfern said,
I remember.
Yeah, just watched 3 episodes. It grew on me. Can't decide what age it's for. The slime monster one is scary, which is great.
It was a horror episode, and I was really worried about it. I was kind of like, this is episode 7, and does it mean we're going to get a lot of kids sort of turning off at this episode? And ultimately, we went with it, and Netflix thought it was great. We didn't see a massive drop off. Then I think it is quite scary, and we did push the boundaries, I think, with the action and excitement, but also with the sort of scope and the animation and the sort of environments and the characters. And I think we gave the team at Abel and Baker a few heart attacks and say, you want to build this giant monster, but you're going to use them in one episode for about 3 minutes, and so it's but I think all those things kind of pay off because they add to the sort of why notness of the show. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel everybody arrives at the watering hole and has their episode of the day. It is really a kind of a big adventure, and we luckily with Netflix we had enough money to kind of not be too shackled, and like, okay, we need to really keep the scope down. We didn't have a ton of money either, so we had to be sort of reasonable. We probably didn't have as much money as Hot Wheels, but we did what we could with what we had, and it was enough to sort of feel that we could get the show that we wanted out of it.
Was the 3-episode Stitch thing intentional? Was that always there, or was that something that came along after you were in production?
Relatively early in production, Netflix kind of showed us some examples of how they did that. And I guess it kind of gives that half-hour watching time. And I think what it also does is it stops giving audiences so many opportunities to turn off, because it would just be a title card in between the sort of 2 episodes without having credits. Because if you have credits and a title sequence every 7 minutes, it's just a lot of downtime, I think, for the watching experience. And so stitching them together gives half-hour chunks that are like, oh, sit down and watch 20 25 minutes of this, and then you can decide if you want to watch another 25 or whatever. But I just think it takes some of the wind out of the sails if you have credits and all that stuff that often, even if it sort of skips ahead,
and perhaps provides a bit of a cushion to that scary episode, right? When it's packaged with another 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that was episode 7, and so you'd have a couple other episodes to sort of get over it, get over your trauma.
I wondered though, with the stitching together, whether in some ways do you feel like you get the sense of which shows are landing because they're all stitched together as 3? Because if they were kind of separate, and you saw that that Halloween episode was rating much higher or lower than the others, you could draw some conclusions from that. But when the 3 are stitched together, it blurs those distinctions a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't really looked at the per episode numbers and drop off and that sort of granular of detail. We know that, we had a really great completion rate of the show, of the sort of percentage of audience that would sort of watch the whole thing through, started it. So that was, that performed very strongly. Yeah, so I think yeah, I don't think that informs sort of our thinking of it in any great detail. But you know, you're right, and we did move some episodes around to kind of that felt like they were kind of. There's a few episodes that are a little bit more bottleish episodes. We said, oh, we can move that in here,
right,
and but the only ones that sort of the last in the finale, which is quite an epic finale where the volcano erupts and all the chicks have been sort of like kidnapped and there's a big epic battle. That's the one episode that sort of spans over or the story that really spans over 2 episodes as a sort of follow-on 14-minuter. But you know,
yeah.
And then the thing is now, Paul, right? Like, what's the status of Bad Dinosaurs? Like the next series renewal, etc. The series is we were talking before, unrenewed. Yes. Unrenewed is the new cancelled.
I think unrenewed is the new cancelled. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't get to make a second series of Bad Dinosaurs, which is a real shame. I think we had a lot of fun making it and a lot of potential to make more. But it's we also sort of look back at the time when we were in development and the time we were in production, and there was quite a few sort of bumpy patches. You know, I remember when we got announced a couple of years ago at Annecy, it was a real surprise to us. And I think, it came off the back of a few cancellations, and I think Netflix were really keen to sort of announce that, hey, we're still making stuff, we're going to make good stuff. And then there had been a few other shows that were sort of canceled mid-production that we had seen, and that's brutal. And, we're really sort of thrilled that we got to make the show. It got out on air, and we're really proud of it. And
the audience came for it.
Audience came for it, but the world of streaming and the priorities of streamers have evolved, and I don't think originals without a proven audience that need incubation time on platform are the priorities. They want to make things that are massively successful, and I think really it would have to have been a real surprise success, and being delivering on the potential probably, I guess, is just not really good enough, and to reinvest in, I suppose, and that certainly has changed the way that we think about going into streamers and talking about shows that we want to pitch to them. I think we have really taken a step backward on taking those types of projects into streamers, and that's why we're thinking about how could we incubate these shows in a different way, and how can we build an audience, or do we want to go to streamers and say, hey, have you got this gigantic IP you want us to make for you? I guess there's different types of structures that we're looking
but it's like you're being very gracious about it, so I'll just say it. Like it is frustrating though, because original IP, it's like the engagement is there by the yardstick that the streamer has called, and like even Bluey was not an overnight success. Bluey was not an overnight success at all, and the data supports that too. It took nurturing, it took building over a number of years to go there, and that's what kids content needs, and the established IP will just get exhausted, and if that's all we're going for all the time.
Yeah, I mean, Peppa Pig for 7 years.
Yeah, so did Paw Patrol. Paw Patrol did like 3-4.
I think that's probably the time that you launched was, looking back in the context of those other IP too, that was the height of impatience. It was the opposite of really what kids content needs on those platforms. And we've spoken about it a lot, how they need a different approach to the very much hit-driven, binge-worthy stuff that's aimed at adults.
Yeah,
I do wonder if that that will be acknowledged at some point, that need for patience.
And the other thing that I think is like that data angle. I was reflecting on this recently. It was like, YouTube creators have that data at their fingertips. That's why they're able to adjust the production. Things that you were talking about, Paul, about the thumbnail artists at Netflix, doing a great job on those visuals, and that's you kind of live or die on that, and great that you got in and they loved that they connected with the show and they were able to do that. But a creator on YouTube at least is able to kind of do that for themselves and make sure that the visual merchandising of the product that they're creating is is adequate. Ideally more than adequate, is something that really pops. So that kind of the severance between the content creator and the engagement data is kind of like, it's kind of a challenge, which is obviously Netflix are being really transparent, or far more transparent than other streamers about it. They're dropping this every 6 months. We have the weekly top 10, so there are things we're able to see.
Yeah, and I guess for production companies it's a real challenge, right? Because YouTube doesn't, especially for animation production companies, YouTube doesn't represent this great savior of revenue, because there's so many eyeballs there. It's fantastic, but creating a revenue stream off of content on YouTube is very difficult if it's as labor intensive as animation is, and maybe AI will come in and change that,
solve it all.
Maybe you're looking at a multi-platform type approach, or you have some investment to be able to build a brand over time that you believe in. But that's a very big challenge, and that's an uphill battle. And there's some companies that are doing quite well with it. But I was speaking to a company yesterday who said, their revenue on YouTube post the advertising legislation changes is dropped by a factor of 8, and so that's a big challenge if you want to go YouTube first. And but the flip side of that is that's where all the kids are, and so I can understand how the streamers are looking at content saying, well, really what we want to do is we want to service a big broad audience. We want parents and we want something for the kids. We want the kids things to be easy and low hanging fruit. And so, a big toy brand or a co-production with a toy company makes sense. And I think our show is just a victim of not only not being a sort of huge IP, but coming at a time where it's like, okay, where are we going to cut our budget? The budget's shrinking. Hopefully it's a phase and, budgets will sort of rebound or whatever, but they need to cut stuff. And, we either sort of, you cut off the show that's an indie producer in London or a big partner that you're making multiple shows with, that's another big sort of company that can bring some financial muscle to the table as well. And so as much as it is really frustrating, because I think we very much delivered on the what we set out to do, which was make a great looking and really funny show. It's a shame that we don't get to make any more of it.
And on that, is there no real avenue to give that show a life somewhere else?
I think that's those are sort of ongoing conversations we try and have. But fundamentally, with the streamers, and the great thing about working with them is they can unlock shows extremely quickly. We're trying to work on shows where we're bringing together international co-productions, broadcasters from multiple territories, sales agents, MGs, soft money, grants, all these sorts of things to try and make up a budget. And I'm losing my hair over it slowly, but it's going. And the joy of working with a streamer is that they will finance the whole thing, and you can focus on making the show. And you haven't got these conflicting ideas from different stakeholders and all that stuff to sort of manage. And in the best case, that all works great, and you have ownership over your IP, and you're able to be in control of its destiny. But that's not always the case, and it's really difficult. We're meeting with so many potential co-producers who have projects, who have got a commissioner on board in a local territory, who have got a portion of the budget, but their committed spend way outstrips the amount of money they've got from the commissioners. And so they're kind of their hands are tied in terms of being able to get these shows over the line and into production. And so while it's deeply frustrating, and I wish that we could get the rights back and go and take it somewhere else and sell it. Fundamentally, Netflix sort of paid for it all and paid enough for us to make the best show we possibly could. And so we kind of weigh up those two things. And I think for us as a company, there's a world in which those sorts of deals are perfect for certain IPs, and other types of deals are better for different IP. And given that this was our first show as a production company, we absolutely bite their hand off again 10 times out of 10 to do it. I just we've certainly learned a lot about and having maybe the credibility to be able to look at alternative routes of finance. Now we're kind of going with each project. Okay, what's the best fit for this? What's the best fit for that? And then we have a option A, option B, option C, and it's like, which one can we get pulled together? You know, is a streamer going to buy this show? Yes or no? Okay, fine. Are we going to be able to get enough co-production pieces together to be able to finance it? Should we be looking at YouTube first and building out a franchise? Should we be looking at series or features? And so we've taken some series projects because the commissioning is dried up pretty massively, and we're pivoting them onto sort of features and saying, okay, well, as a feature project, maybe there's some interesting sort of co-productions, obviously new tax credits. There's different ways of financing it that don't have to start with a UK broadcaster. And so, you know, that kind of liberates certain projects as well. And I think our job as producers is really about looking at a slate of projects and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to get this made in the best way possible and the best fit for us and for all the other stakeholders? And, you know, sometimes that is get a bunch of money from and give away a bunch of rights. Sometimes that is let's do it with a little money and let's try and build the thing over time, and you kind of make the judgment calls where you can. Sometimes it's like whatever offers on the table, we'll have to go for it because we all need to get paid.
No, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. You've got to be kind of pragmatic, really, and understand what the motivations of each partner are, and assess whether that fits with the project. Do we want to do past, present, and future?
I was just thinking that, but I haven't warned Paul.
Okay.
Yes, we forgot, didn't we, last time? So
we did.
So we've been asking people on the podcast, and apologies you haven't had time to prepare, Paul, but what were their favorite kids shows from the past, and what do they love in the present, and what kind of things are you looking forward to in the future, whether it's a piece of content or a movie or a concert? It can be anything.
Well, we won't hold you to it for the rest of your life. It's not legally binding.
Gosh, that's really, really tough. Well, the thing that obviously comes to mind is maybe a bit of an obvious one in Gravity Falls.
Yes.
I think Gravity Falls was such a fantastic show with fun characters, great adventures, some darkness, some light, some sort of a bit of you know, satire and some crazy adventure, and you know, that sort of show feels very liberated in its storytelling, and so yeah, so that's certainly one that jumps to mind as a sort of a show from a few years ago.
Yes, definitely. One of my peak career moments was commissioning Gravity Falls, Gnome Barks the Rainbow the movie. You can hit YouTube for that one.
And what did you watch when you were 6, the same age as viewers of Bad Dinosaurs?
You know, I probably watched a bunch of Peanuts. You know, I think that was great. I think there was a certain melancholy and a certain awareness of the world, and maybe world wariness that connected with me as a young child, and you know, with also a bit of fantasy and a bit of adventure, and a bit of sort of like, how am I going to find my way in the world? And you know, that was always really good. You know, and you'd have these sort of holiday specials and the Great Pumpkin or whatever it was, and you know, they were really lovely when I was a kid growing up. And in terms of things now, what am I watching that I really like? I wish I could have sort of prepped for this, because I'm sure I would be a bit more innovative. But I certainly enjoyed Hilda when it came out. I thought that was a fantastic show. Yeah. Again, leaning into something that felt sweet enough and earnest enough, but also had really wonderful aspects of fantasy in it, and great adventure, and quite an odyssey, and it's sort of the right amount of sort of good storytelling mixed with wacky sort of character design and all of that. And in terms of what I'm looking forward to in the future, was that the sort of last piece of that?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be really innovative digital storytelling, digital production sort of methodology. So we're developing a feature film that's using performance capture, and it's getting into this hyper-realistic, world. So I'm really excited about the new Secret Level series that's coming out on Amazon, which is a sort of taking it's like in the Love, Death and Robots vein, but it's sort of taking old video game IP and building animations based on them. And there is really exciting capabilities utilizing emerging technology to be able to build really fantastic worlds, not necessarily needing $100 million budgets and pipelines to do it. And so, there's some fantastic things that are coming out in Europe that I think will look as good as anything that's coming out of Hollywood. And so I'm excited by the potential of those kind of new and innovative animation pipelines.
Amazing.
Yeah, great. That's very hopeful. I like that.
Cool, good.
And we did kind of put you on the spot, so thank you for
I'll come back another time for a quick 30-second. Actually, I should have said this.
And similarities actually between what you said about Hilda and Peanuts, with that melancholy kind of almost kind of not world weariness, but certainly not everything is perfection, and I quite like that.
Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us, Paul, and telling us all about your journey with Bad Dinosaurs.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been really good fun.
Great stuff. So thanks very much, Paul, and thank you to our listeners for listening, and we'll see you at the next episode.